Hello there, fandoms of the world. My name is the Geek Theorist, and welcome to How Shows Should Go, a new series here on my channel where I take a show and describe how I would write an upcoming episode or season, and then challenge the show writers to do it better. Now before we begin, let me just say that this is in no way intended to be a self-indulgent description of everything I personally want, but rather a prediction of the best possible way that the show could unfold in the interest of all the viewers. In my perfect world, I may have done things differently, but for this series, it's for everyone. That being said, let's get right into it with our first episode of How Shows Should Go. Today's episode, How RWBY Volume 4 Should Go. So then, just to be clear, an entire volume of RWBY is very long and has many interwoven storylines throughout, some more major than others. I, on the other hand, only have about 10 minutes because these videos do take a long time to make, and I'd like to not have to write and record a 2-hour script and then add graphics to all of it. That in mind, I'm going to use my time to cover only the most important plot points and story arcs. So where are we now? Well, as of the start of Volume 4, Blake is on the move, fighting the White Fang. Weiss has returned to her family in Atlas. Yang is at home in Patch, dealing with her mental and emotional wounds. And RWBY has formed the new Team Ranger, or Junior. Our first episode should, for the most part, focus on our titular-ish character, at least in the beginning. So we open with Team Ranger, and we can have them fighting some Grimm, doing cool things, showing off their new outfits, and just generally being pals, etc. It's important here that we see character growth. We see how RWBY has matured, how John has been affected by Pyrrha's death, and honestly, Ren and Nora can kinda just stay the same. Honestly, there's not much else to say about Team Ranger at this moment. I feel like a large portion of the actual volume is gonna focus on them when it's released, but I honestly think that's the least compelling storyline we have as of right now. That being said, it would be difficult for the writers to show 4 separate storylines all occurring at the same time without things feeling sloppy and disjointed. So that in mind, let's have Team Ranger head off towards Atlas to find Weiss. This makes the most sense, as we're going to need to connect some of these plot lines sooner rather than later, and Blake and Yang are kind of out of the picture as far as finding them and joining back up goes. So we send RWBY and Team Ranger off to Atlas. Speaking of which, Weiss's segments are obviously going to focus on her struggles with her family and her status as the heiress to the Shani Dust Company. That being said, Weiss has been through perhaps the most character development of any member of Team RWBY, and we don't want to backtrack with her. She's still going to have to deal with a personal struggle, however. Now, a lot of people are saying that Weiss's dad is an awful guy and doesn't really care about his daughter's wishes, but that's not how we're going to paint him, at least not at first. The Mr. Shani that we are going to see is a cheerful family man who gives Weiss everything she desires and just generally seems like a caring father. The only catch is that Weiss must not leave because, according to Mr. Shani, it's too dangerous right now. Now, initially, despite her father's kindness, Weiss is against everything he's saying and begins plotting her escape. But over time, she starts to really feel like she's at home. Gone are all the things that used to make her so rebellious. Instead, she just feels like a member of a loving family. And so she begins to accept more and more of her father's wishes, wearing her evening gown instead of her combat skirt, attending social events, generally acting like the good little heiress. It's important that we make it clear why this change is occurring, however. It has nothing to do with wealth or status. That's the old Weiss Shani. Instead, it's all about this new feeling of belonging and family that she's never really knew before, at least not with her father. And this is where we're going to leave Weiss for now, but we'll come back to her. So moving on to Blake, a lot of her story arc is going to be more emotional and character-based than action-related. When we see Blake, she's traveling around, trying to find out information about the White Fang and the whereabouts of Adam. She's very clearly showing signs that seeing Adam once again has opened up a lot of old wounds, and she's not nearly as confident in herself as she once was. Despite thinking it was for the best, she'll be feeling a lot of guilt over leaving her team, and specifically Yang, behind after what happened. Now, here's where things are going to get a little controversial. While I do believe that Blake and Yang are ultimately going to end up together by the end of the show, I can see how Blake and Sun also have a connection. I think Sun will play a large part in helping Blake through her emotional struggles during their travels. And as much as I really don't like it, I think it makes for a better eventual payoff to have Blake and Sun begin to foster a romantic connection here. Now I know, the period of time following a traumatic event isn't exactly the best time for romance, but with Blake recovering from this trauma and with Sun helping her through it, the two are going to become closer than ever, with Sun serving as a kind of pillar for Blake. Perhaps it isn't exactly right for the two to be thinking of romance during this time, but it makes sense that this connection may arise from their time spent together sharing emotions. So that's going to be where we're leaving Blake for now, but again, we'll get back to her. And now for Yang. Yang's story arc is definitely going to be the most interesting of the volume, at least in my opinion, and as such, it's been the hardest to think about. But as it stands, I think Yang will slowly start to get back on her feet, little by little. This may come naturally, or perhaps it may be catalyzed by a talk with her father about her mother. But little by little, Yang is going to start regaining strength and getting ready to fight again. We're going to hear more about the past from Taeyang, as well as seeing more of the bond between Yang and her father. The two are going to start training together to get Yang back into fighting shape. However, Yang will find that she isn't picking things back up as quickly as she would like, and this will frustrate her. Furthermore, we'll see signs of the emotional damage done to her by the fight with Adam and the loss of her arm. With all of this going on, the Yang we'll be seeing in Volume 4 will not be the Yang we know, which is very important to what happens later. Some way or another, and it doesn't really matter how, Yang will finally confront her mother. I understand some of you might think I'm jumping the gun with this, but hear me out. Now is the perfect time for this confrontation, because Raven will tell Yang that she can make her strong again, that she can make Yang even more powerful than she had been before the loss of her arm. Raven will reveal that she is working for Salem, but that there is power to be gained if Yang were to train beneath her. All Yang has to do is join her. This is why this needs to happen now. The Yang we knew before would never willingly join forces with someone working for Salem, even if that person was her mother. However, the Yang I've described is dealing with pent-up frustration, feeling weak, feeling betrayed by her closest friend, and maybe willing to do anything to feel like her former self. After all, Yang is the girl who gets left behind, but right now, her mother has come back for her, while Blake only ran away. Everything up until this moment has been steering Yang further and further down this path, and now, with coercion from her mother, she agrees. Raven takes Yang under her wing, pun intended, and through small snippets we see the progress of Yang's training, and she is truly becoming stronger than ever before. We see her sparring with Mercury and defeating him with relative ease. We see her putting up a good fight against Raven herself. Slowly, she is being molded into yet another weapon in Salem's arsenal. So now, as it stands, we have RWBY and Team Ranger on their way to Atlas to find Weiss. Weiss feeling more and more at home in Atlas. Blake traveling with Sun and the two exploring their romance, and Yang traveling with Raven. With everything put together, it should take most of the volume to get to this point, and now it's time for the climax. So RWBY and Team Ranger arrive in Atlas to spring Weiss, and they send RWBY alone to sneak into the Schnee mansion. RWBY finds Weiss, who is overjoyed to see her. However, when RWBY says they have to leave, Weiss is torn. As much as she loved being a huntress, all of the trauma she witnessed during the Battle of Beacon, compared to the life she has now, it's causing her to doubt that being a huntress is what she really wants. Meanwhile, Blake and Sun are searching for leads on the White Fang somewhere when they are confronted by Yang and Raven. At first, Blake looks happy to see Yang, but she soon realizes how much things have changed. Blake instructs Sun to let her and Yang speak alone, and Yang tells Raven the same. Once Blake and Yang are alone, they talk, and Yang reveals that she is working for Salem now. When Blake asks her why, Yang responds that she was tired of being left behind by the people she cared about, and Raven came back, while Blake never did. When the two no longer have anything else to say, Yang lunges and attacks Blake, and the two begin to fight. Back in Atlas, Weiss is still not made up her mind. However, she and RWBY are interrupted by Mr. Schnee, who bursts into the room. Seeing RWBY, he immediately calls for his security to attack her and get Weiss away from her. Weiss begs her father not to do this, but he doesn't listen and RWBY is forced to flee. However, she soon returns with the rest of Team Ranger, who easily dispose of Mr. Schnee's security and begin urging Weiss to come with them once more. However, before Weiss can make a decision, Mr. Schnee appears again, this time with some kind of weapon, robot, whatever thing that can make him an actual threat to them. Weiss continuously begs her father to stop, but he tells her no, going on a classist tirade about how scum like this needs to be cleaned up, or whatever makes him sound just the most absolutely terrible. So he's able to take out Team Ranger with his weapon, robot, whatever, and Weiss realizes that he actually intends to kill RWBY. Before he can, she does some glyph stuff and stops him for just long enough for herself and the members of Team Ranger to escape. This is essentially where we leave them for the rest of the volume. Back with Blake and Yang, the two have, just the coolest fight ever, obviously. But Yang, with only her one arm, is able to overpower Blake and knock her down. Hearing the sounds of the fight, Raven and Sun have returned, and Raven instructs Yang to kill Blake. Sun obviously leaps forward and tries to stop her, but Raven stops him, stabbing him through the chest with her sword. Yang stands over Blake, but finds that she is unable to kill her former best friend. Raven says something like, "You are still weak," before stepping forward to do it herself. She is stopped, however, by Crow. The two have a short battle before Crow manages to escape with Blake and Sun in tow. Sun may or may not be alive. And that's essentially where we leave things at the end of the volume. Half of Team RWBY reunited, while the other half has become more separated than ever before. I know this is still a dark ending after the especially dark end to Volume 3, but there's still hope for things to get better with RWBY and Weiss together by the end. So there you have it. That's how RWBY Volume 4 should go. Rooster Teeth? Do it better. I'm the Geek Theorist, and this has been How Shows Should Go. Until next time.